Animation is supposed to be safe, colorful fun, right? Think again. Some of the boldest, weirdest, and most unforgettable animated films were hidden from you, not because they failed, but because entire governments and studios decided you weren't allowed to watch them. Why would cartoons spark such fear? And what dangerous ideas could be lurking behind painted frames? Let's peel back the curtain and uncover 15 animated classics they tried to erase. Fritz the Cat, 1972. When you hear animated cat, you probably think of Saturday morning laughs. But in 1972, Fritz the Cat clawed its way into theaters with something no one expected. Biting social satire that poked fun at American life in a way live-action films wouldn't dare. Directed by Ralph Bakshi and based on underground comics, the film showed a side of America few wanted on screen: race tensions, political disillusionment, youth rebellion, and cultural hypocrisy. It was brash, it was loud, and it held up a mirror to a society already uneasy. No wonder the censors pounced. The United Kingdom outright banned it, while other countries cut entire sequences. To fans, those bans only added fuel to the fire. Suddenly, Fritz the Cat wasn't just a movie, it was a dare. Do you have the nerve to watch what they don't want you to see? College campuses turned it into a cult staple. Bootlegs circulated and word of mouth carried it far beyond its limited release. What made governments nervous was never just the cartoon antics. It was the unflinching way Bakshi exposed hypocrisy using the very medium people thought was only for kids. It blurred lines, mixing comedy with commentary, and critics still argue over whether it was reckless or revolutionary. By shutting it down, authorities created a legend. Fritz the Cat proved that cartoons could stir the same kind of fire usually reserved for gritty dramas. And once you've seen it, you'll never look at just a cartoon the same way again. Barefoot Gen, 1983. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones drawn in the simplest lines. Barefoot Gen, released in 1983, told the story of a young boy surviving the aftermath of Hiroshima's bombing. It was raw, heartbreaking, and painfully honest. Too honest, according to some. In Japan, the film was welcomed at first as an educational tool. But as the years passed, school boards and local governments began pulling it from classrooms. Their reason? They claimed it was too graphic for children. But critics pointed out the deeper motive. It didn't just show destruction, it highlighted the failure of leadership, the suffering of civilians, and the hidden cost of war. That honesty hit nerves. Certain political groups argued it was biased, while veterans' associations claimed it dishonored the military. Soon, screenings were quietly canceled, and the film was shelved in several prefectures. Yet outside those walls of silence, Barefoot Gen found life. Anti-war activists championed it. Artists hailed it as one of the boldest animated dramas ever made. Its simple, almost childlike art style only made the brutal realities hit harder. You weren't just watching history, you were feeling it. The irony? By banning it in schools, they made it even more talked about among students. Bootleg copies circulated, and curious young viewers sought it out precisely because adults tried to hide it. Barefoot Gen stands as proof that sometimes the harshest truths come in the form of ink and paint, and censorship can't erase memory. Song of the South, 1946. Few films in Disney's history carry a shadow quite like Song of the South. Released in 1946, it mixed live action and animation in a way that was groundbreaking at the time. The film introduced the world to the catchy tune Zip-a-Dee-Doo-Dah, which even won an Academy Award. But behind the music and charming characters, controversy brewed. Almost immediately, critics pointed out its troubling portrayal of life in the Reconstruction-era South. While the film never specifies the timeline, its idyllic depiction of formerly enslaved people as happily working the land struck many as dangerously misleading. Instead of confronting history, the film seemed to gloss over it with cheerful songs and talking animals. As the decades rolled on, protests grew louder. By the 1980s, Disney quietly pulled Song of the South from circulation in the United States. It was never released on home video there, and streaming platforms have avoided it. In countries like the United Kingdom, limited VHS releases appeared, but the film was later withdrawn, cementing its status as a forbidden Disney movie. What makes Song of the South fascinating is the tension between its technical brilliance and its cultural blind spots. On one hand, it pushed the boundaries of blending animation with live action. On the other, it became a case study in how nostalgia can rewrite the past. The ban didn't erase it. It only made it more infamous. Bootlegs circulate online, and debates about whether Disney should ever release it officially continue to this day. Song of the South stands as a reminder that sometimes the most controversial films aren't the wild experimental ones, but the ones that hide uncomfortable truths beneath a smiling surface. Waltz with Bashir. 2008. Animation usually takes us to fantasy worlds, but Waltz with Bashir did the opposite. Released in 2008, this haunting Israeli film dove straight into the real memories of soldiers recalling the chaos of the Lebanon conflict. Its style was mesmerizing, dreamlike visuals mixing with stark testimony. But its honesty made it a target. Several countries in the Middle East immediately banned it, refusing to allow screenings. Officials didn't want their citizens watching a film that laid bare the human cost of war, especially from such a unique perspective. It wasn't the violence that troubled them most, it was the way the film questioned memory, responsibility, and how ordinary people are swept into tragedy. Director Ari Folman didn't soften anything. Instead, he used animation as a tool to process trauma. Nightmares take shape on screen, surreal and terrifying, yet grounded in lived experience. Critics hailed it as a new kind of animated documentary, one that could confront subjects live action might never capture. The bans, of course, only made it more sought after. Festivals outside the region celebrated it. International audiences praised it as groundbreaking. And underground copies still found their way into places where officials tried to silence it. Waltz with Bashir proved something censors always seem to forget. People don't stop wanting the truth just because you hide it. If anything, the attempt to bury it turned this animated memory into a global phenomenon. Tale of Tales. 1979. Sometimes the most powerful works don't shout, they whisper. Tale of Tales, released in the Soviet Union in 1979, is widely regarded as one of the greatest animated films ever made. But for years it was buried by the very system that produced it. Directed by Yuri Norstein, the film doesn't follow a typical plot. Instead, it drifts through images of childhood, war, family, and loss, tied together by the quiet presence of a little wolf pup. It's haunting, poetic, and deeply human. Too human, perhaps, for the officials in charge. Censors labeled it too abstract and politically unclear. What they really meant was that it didn't glorify the state or follow the usual heroic patterns. It lingered on hunger, on absence, on the quiet ache of memory, things the government preferred to keep out of the spotlight. For years, Tale of Tales existed in limbo, technically not erased, but rarely shown. It became an underground legend, whispered about by animators and passed around on grainy reels. Western critics who managed to see it declared it a masterpiece, calling Norstein the Pushkin of animation. What frightened officials was exactly what drew artists to it, its refusal to serve as propaganda. Tale of Tales dared to simply be honest, and in that honesty it exposed truths about life that politics couldn't contain. Today, it stands as proof that even the softest imagery can unsettle power. 1001 Nights, 1969. When Osamu Tezuka, often called the god of manga, decided to make an animated feature in 1969, Audiences expected something magical. What they got was 1001 Nights, a wild psychedelic journey through Arabian-inspired tales. Vibrant, experimental, and filled with bold imagery, it was unlike anything seen before. But not everyone was ready for it. Across the Middle East, the film was swiftly banned. Authorities claimed it disrespected cultural traditions, pointing to its surreal and sometimes risque interpretations of ancient legends. The mixture of comedy, fantasy, and irreverence was simply too much for strict censors at the time. Tezuka's style was playful but also daring. He mashed together traditional storytelling with bold, colorful animation that looked more like a kaleidoscope than a fairy tale. For Japanese audiences, it was an eccentric experiment. For foreign censors, it was a red flag. The irony? By trying to suppress it, officials gave it cult status. Film students and collectors around the world hunted for reels and later VHS copies. Fans marveled at its audacity, its refusal to play it safe. Some even argue it paved the way for the more daring anime of the 1970s and 80s. 1001 Nights may not be Tezuka's most polished work, but it's his most fearless. The ban only cemented its reputation as the kind of film you weren't supposed to see, but couldn't resist searching for. South Park banned episodes. 2006 to 2010. Sometimes it's not a whole movie, it's specific episodes that disappear. Between 2006 and 2010, the creators of South Park aired some of their most daring stories, including Cartoon Wars, 200, and 201. Almost instantly, broadcasters yanked them off the air in several countries. Why? Because these episodes crossed lines that censors refused to tolerate. They poked fun at world figures, touched on sensitive cultural topics, and doubled down with the show's trademark irreverence. For authorities, the humor was too sharp, too risky. The result? Bans in multiple regions, reruns canceled, and streaming platforms quietly removing the episodes. But here's where it gets ironic. South Park itself has always been a parody of censorship. The banned episodes often centered on the very idea of free expression, mocking how society reacts when you try to control art. In other words, the bans proved the show's point. Fans responded exactly as you'd expect. Bootlegs circulated online, turning the forbidden episodes into cult treasures. Viewers debated whether the network should have stood its ground or played it safe. Either way, the controversy only drew more attention. For a show that thrives on pushing boundaries, the bans became a badge of honor. The missing episodes are now infamous, lessons in how humor can spark debates that no official order can really silence. Fire and Ice, 1983. What happens when a legendary animator teams up with a fantasy illustrator known for epic artwork? You get Fire and Ice, released in 1983, a sword and sorcery adventure that looked like a living painting. Ralph Bakshi joined forces with Frank Frazetta to create a world of icy kingdoms, fiery battles, and stunning landscapes. But while fans of fantasy adored, its censors in parts of Europe weren't so enthusiastic. The film's intense imagery, battle scenes, perilous journeys, and daring costumes pushed it into controversial territory. Some countries restricted screenings or demanded heavy edits, arguing it wasn't appropriate for younger audiences. Of course, that only made it more appealing to fans who craved something edgier than Saturday morning cartoons. Fire and Ice didn't pretend to be for everyone. It leaned into dark tones, looming villains, and raw adventure. The rotoscoped animation gave every movement a lifelike weight, setting it apart from anything Disney or mainstream studios were making. The ban gave it cult power. Instead of vanishing, it became a late-night favorite for fantasy lovers. Bootleg VHS tapes circulated, and years later, DVD and streaming gave it new life. Today, it's considered a hidden gem of 80s animation, a reminder that bold visions often get pushed aside before they're celebrated. Fire and ice may have been too intense for some censors, but for fantasy fans, it was exactly the kind of heat they wanted. Yellow Submarine, 1968. At first glance, it's a harmless, trippy adventure starring the Beatles and a gang of blue meanies. But when Yellow Submarine surfaced in 1968, not everyone was ready to embrace its psychedelic glow. Across the Eastern Bloc, governments decided it was too closely tied to Western counterculture. The message of peace, imagination, and rebellion was labeled subversive. In Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union, officials kept it out of cinemas entirely. To them, this wasn't just a cartoon, it was a neon-colored Trojan horse filled with ideas about individuality and resistance. The film's psychedelic visuals, abstract storytelling, and message of harmony didn't match the rigid narratives of official propaganda. But the ban only made fans hungrier. Western travelers smuggled in bootleg copies. University students passed reels under the table. For young dreamers stuck behind the Iron Curtain, just hearing about a Beatles cartoon full of wild colors and music was enough to spark curiosity. What's remarkable is how timeless it feels today. The film's playful animation and surreal design influenced everything from MTV visuals to modern music videos. By trying to stop it, censors only guaranteed its place in history as a symbol of art's power to cross borders. So while some kids in the 60s were singing along to "All You Need Is Love," others had to wait years to see what all the fuss was about. And when they finally did, the message hit even harder. Imagination can't be locked away. Urotsuki Doji, Legend of the Overfiend, 1989. In 1989, a Japanese animation arrived that would redefine the limits of what audiences thought cartoons could do. Urotsuki Doji. Legend of the Overfiend wasn't a whimsical fantasy. It was dark, chaotic, and filled with imagery far more intense than most people expected. Almost instantly, it landed in the crosshairs of censors worldwide. The United Kingdom banned it outright, labeling it too extreme for public release. Other countries followed suit, either blocking it entirely or trimming huge sections before allowing limited screenings. Why the uproar? Because Overfiend didn't just dabble in horror, it dove headfirst into it. Monsters, transformations, and scenes of shocking violence filled its frames. For fans of experimental anime, it was groundbreaking. For governments, it was unacceptable. Of course, that didn't stop it from circulating. Bootleg VHS tapes spread quickly, making it one of the most talked-about underground anime titles of the 1990s. Collectors sought it out precisely because it was forbidden. Its reputation as the anime you weren't supposed to see made it irresistible. Critics remain divided. Some dismiss it as outrageous spectacle, others argue it pushed animation into uncharted territory. But either way, the bans turned it into a legend. The lesson? When you take something this bold and try to hide it, you don't kill its influence, you supercharge it. Overfiend became proof that animation could shock just as much as any live-action horror, and that's exactly why it terrified censors. A Kite, 1998. Independent Japanese animator Yasuomi Umetsu released A Kite in 1998, and it immediately became one of the most controversial titles in anime history. On the surface, it's an action thriller about a young woman turned into an assassin. But the way it told that story, gritty, violent, and unflinchingly bleak, made it a lightning rod. Several countries, including Norway and Australia, banned it outright. Others heavily edited it, cutting entire sequences. Censors argued it was too graphic, too intense, and far from what most people expected from cartoons. But in doing so, they accidentally gave a kite cult status. Fans across the globe hunted down uncut versions, swapping tapes and DVDs in underground circles. For many, the banned label became a badge of honor. If it was too much for officials, it had to be worth seeing. What's remarkable is how influential it turned out to be. The film's stylistic action sequences, slow-motion gunfights, brooding cityscapes, sudden bursts of violence inspired countless later anime and even Hollywood directors. Quentin Tarantino openly praised its energy and design, weaving nods to it into his own films. By banning a kite, governments turned it from a niche anime into a global talking point. It's the perfect example of how censorship can backfire, taking a small underground film and elevating it into legend. The Thief and the Cobbler, 1993, original cut. If there's a holy grail of banned animation, it might be The Thief and the Cobbler. Richard Williams spent decades crafting it, starting in the 1960s, pouring his life into its intricate, hand-drawn art. By the time a version finally released in 1993, it was a shadow of what he intended. The original cut was quietly suppressed, taken from Williams, and recut into a safer, more commercial product. In some Middle Eastern countries, even the altered version faced bans for its themes and imagery. The film's dreamlike cities, religious references, and unconventional storytelling made censors uneasy. But the legend of the lost cut refused to die. Animators whispered about the unfinished masterpiece that could have rivaled Disney at its peak. In the 2000s, fans began piecing together the surviving footage, creating the so-called recobbled cut. Online, it spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the film that was hidden for decades found new life on streaming sites and DVD collectors' shelves. The irony is staggering. A movie once buried by studios and censors is now celebrated as one of animation's greatest what-if stories. Its staggering detail, surreal humor, and bold ambition inspired generations of artists. By trying to erase it, officials and executives only made it more mythic. Today, The Thief and the Cobbler stands as proof that you can't keep a masterpiece locked away forever. So, there you have it. 15 animated classics that were hidden, banned, or twisted out of reach. But here's the truth. Banning something doesn't erase it. If anything, it makes it louder. From underground bootlegs to streaming rediscoveries, these films prove that imagination always finds a way through the cracks. Which one shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more hidden history. After all, what else is out there waiting to be uncovered?